Hello, everyone, and welcome to Midnight Whispers. I know many of you listen to these stories to relax and slowly fall asleep. Before we begin, feel free to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from tonight. If you enjoy these stories, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Now, get comfortable, take a slow breath, and let's begin. Before I get into any of this, I want to be clear about one thing. I'm not looking for warnings, explanations, rituals, advice, or suggestions on how to cleanse my house or get rid of anything that might be in it. I don't really believe in ghosts or the supernatural. I want to believe, sure, but I don't. I'm skeptical by nature, and I try very hard to stay grounded in logic. Still, if there really is something here, I don't want it gone. The idea that there might be some kind of connection to a world I wish were real is oddly comforting. If things ever crossed the line or became truly frightening, I'd reconsider. But for now, these are just a few strange moments that have happened in my home, and I thought they were worth sharing. Not as proof of anything, just as stories that still sit in the back of my mind. I moved into this apartment last year. It's old, much older than most places people live in these days, and it has a lot of space. High ceilings, long hallways, rooms that echo slightly when you walk through them. The kind of place that feels like it's been lived in by many different people over many different years. I live there with my girlfriend and my 2 sons. One is 7 years old, the other just 1. They share a bedroom, which made sense at the time. The baby sleeps in a crib, and the older one has his own bed. It's a normal setup, nothing unusual about it. The first strange thing happened on a completely ordinary night. One of those evenings that blur together with all the others. I was putting my older son to bed, doing the usual routine. Pajamas, brushing teeth, a bit of talking to delay the inevitable, because kids always try to stretch bedtime as long as they can. Right as I'm about to tuck him in, he announces that he suddenly needs to go to the bathroom. I know exactly what this is. A classic move, but I play along. While he's gone, I decide to mess with him a little. I crawl into his bed and pull the covers over my head, planning to scare him when he comes back. It's harmless, silly, the kind of thing parents do to get a laugh. I lie there quietly, listening. I hear footsteps coming back into the room. I feel the mattress shift as someone sits down at the foot of the bed. The pressure is very real. It presses down exactly where my son usually sits. I'm waiting for him to say something. To ask why the covers are all messed up, or to giggle, or to poke at the lump where I'm hiding. But nothing happens. No voice, no laughter, no movement. That strikes me as odd, but not alarming. Kids do weird things. Maybe he's trying to scare me back. After a second or two, I throw the covers back and shout, "Boo!" There's no one there. The bed is empty. The room is empty. The door is still open. For a moment, my brain tries to catch up. I tell myself I must have imagined the footsteps, or the pressure, or both. I stay there, sitting up in the bed, feeling suddenly ridiculous and uncomfortable. About 2 minutes later, my son walks back into the room from the bathroom. I don't scare him. I don't joke. I don't say anything about what just happened. I tuck him in, say goodnight, and leave the room feeling unsettled in a way I can't quite explain. It's not fear, exactly. It's confusion. My mind keeps replaying the sensation of someone sitting on the bed. That part felt too real to dismiss easily. A few days later, I tell my girlfriend about it. I laugh it off when I start talking. because that's easier than admitting it bothered me. I expect her to roll her eyes or tell me I probably imagined it. Instead, she gets quiet. She tells me she had a strange experience, too. She says this happened in the boy's bedroom one night when she was trying to get the older one to sleep. The baby was already in his crib, fast asleep. The room was dim, just enough light to see shapes and movement. As she's sitting there, she suddenly hears quick footsteps and sees the shadow of a small figure running out of the room toward the living room. In her mind, it's obvious who it is, the baby. Without really thinking, she gets up to follow him, already annoyed and worried at the same time. But as she steps forward, something makes her turn back. The baby is still in his crib, asleep, not stirring, exactly where he's been the whole time. She stands there for a moment, trying to process what she just saw. She tells herself it was exhaustion, her eyes playing tricks on her brain filling in gaps. She goes back to bed and doesn't mention it until I bring up my story. Hearing her version makes my stomach drop a little. Not because it confirms anything, but because the experiences feel uncomfortably similar. Something seen, something felt, something that looks exactly like one of our children but isn't. Time passes. Life goes on. Weeks turn into months. Nothing dramatic happens. No strange noises, no shadows, no footsteps. I start to convince myself that we were both just tired parents in a new place, reading too much into nothing. Then another incident happens. It's one of those nights when the baby refuses to sleep in his own room and ends up in ours. That happens sometimes, especially when he's teething or sick. So he sleeps in our room, and the older one stays alone in the shared bedroom. Everything seems fine. Around 4 in the morning, the older one comes into our room. He looks tired and irritated. We ask him what's wrong, expecting the usual bad dream or excuse to climb into our bed. Instead, he tells us that the baby has been crying all night and he can't sleep because of it. The baby, at that moment, is sleeping peacefully next to us, has been all night. We don't correct him. We don't tell him that the baby hasn't been in his room. We just let him climb into our bed and go back to sleep. In the dark, my girlfriend and I exchange a look, but neither of us says anything. It feels better not to. The last story is the one that sticks with me the most, not because it's the scariest, but because it feels deeply personal. My girlfriend lost her mother many years ago. Even though a long time has passed, she's still very attached to her. She carries a picture of her everywhere, tucked safely away. It's a quiet kind of grief, always present, never fully gone. On Dia de los Muertos, she decided to make a small altar for her mother in our living room. We're not Mexican, and she doesn't come from that culture, so this wasn't a traditional or knowledgeable act. She did what she had seen in movies, especially Coco. She placed a picture of her mother, lit a candle, and offered an apple. It was simple and heartfelt, more about remembrance than ritual. Later, we were told that traditionally, special candles are used for this occasion. Candles that produce smoke, but no flame. The smoke is said to guide the spirits of loved ones, while fire can attract things you don't want. I don't know how accurate that is, and I'm repeating what I was told, not claiming it as fact. At the time, we didn't know any of this. What happened next is hard to explain away. The altar didn't fall. It didn't tip. Things didn't slide off. They were thrown. First, the apple flew off and hit the floor. A second or two passed. Then the picture fell. Another pause. Then the candle was knocked over. Each object moved separately, with space between each movement. It wasn't gravity. It wasn't imbalance. It was as if something invisible was picking things up and tossing them aside one by one. We stood there, frozen, watching it happen. No wind, no vibration, no explanation. Later, my son ate the apple, which, in hindsight, feels like the kind of decision that gets you killed first in a horror movie. At the time, it just felt easier to treat it like nothing. That's it. That's everything so far. Nothing violent. Nothing truly threatening. Just moments that don't quite fit into a neat, logical box. I don't know what any of it means. I don't know if it means anything at all. I still don't really believe in ghosts, but I can't deny that these things happen, and that they happened in a way that left no easy answers behind. If there is something here, it hasn't hurt anyone. It hasn't scared my kids, at least not openly. It just exists, quietly crossing into our lives now and then, reminding me that maybe the world is bigger, stranger, and less certain than I'd like to admit. And for now, that's enough. I've told this story before, but it's one of those stories that never really loses its weight, no matter how many times it's repeated. It isn't technically my story. It belongs to my mother. But at the same time, it's mine too, because if it hadn't happened, there's a very real chance I wouldn't be here at all. When this took place, my mother was pregnant with me. She was still married to my biological father at the time. Their marriage didn't last forever, and they divorced a couple of years after I was born, but during this period they were still together and, by her account, relatively happy. Life was simple in that way people often only realize later. They were young, expecting their first child, and trying to balance everyday responsibilities with their own interests and passions. My biological father was an actor with a local theater group in Pensacola, Florida. It wasn't a big, famous production company, but it was serious enough to demand long hours, rehearsals, and real commitment. Theater was important to him. It gave him purpose, structure, and a creative outlet that he loved deeply. Because rehearsals could run long and my mother wasn't working at the time, she often went with him. Pregnancy made her restless, and being alone at home all day wasn't good for her mental state. She also wasn't allowed to drive while pregnant. That part always surprises people when they hear it now, but it was something her doctor insisted on. Whether it was due to complications or just extreme caution, I don't know. What I do know is that it meant she relied entirely on my biological father to take her anywhere she needed or wanted to go. If he was going to rehearsal, she was going too. At first, she spent most of her time sitting in his dressing room. She'd bring a book and read while he was on stage waiting for rehearsals to end. That worked for a while, but anyone who's ever sat alone for hours in a quiet, unfamiliar space knows how quickly boredom sets in. The novelty wears off fast, especially when you're pregnant, uncomfortable, and feeling cooped up. So she decided to make herself useful. She started helping out during dress rehearsals, not officially, not as staff, but simply as another set of eyes. She would bring a notepad and a pen and sit in different areas of the theater while the actors rehearsed with the orchestra. She took detailed notes, the kind of things an audience member might notice, but performers and directors sometimes miss when they're too close to the production. She'd note when one actor blocked another from view, depending on where you were sitting. If a prop or part of the set, like a tree, a wall, or the corner of a house, obstructed the line of sight from certain angles, she paid attention to the orchestra, too, noting whether it was too loud or too quiet, whether it drowned out the singers or faded too much during important moments. For musical productions, balance mattered, and she had a good ear for it. She didn't stay in one place. Throughout rehearsals, she moved from one section of the theater to another. Sometimes she'd sit on the main floor. Other times, she'd go up to the balcony to see how things looked from above. She treated it almost like a job, even though no one had asked her to do it. Eventually, the director came to appreciate her notes, and they were taken seriously. Years later, my biological father told me that one of the productions they were working on during that time was either Fiddler on the Roof or Jesus Christ Superstar. He wasn't entirely sure which one lined up with this particular memory, but he remembered growing out a long beard for one of those roles. There's a photo of him holding me as a baby, beard and all, that I've seen more times than I can count. On the night this story centers around, rehearsal went late. The kind of late where everyone is tired, hungry, and mentally checked out, just going through the motions to get to the end. The curtain finally fell, signaling the end of the run-through. People began gathering their things, chatting quietly, and heading out. My mother was sitting in the upper balcony that night. By that point in her pregnancy, her belly was large enough that she couldn't see her feet when she looked down. Anyone who's been pregnant or been close to someone who was knows how much that affects balance and coordination. Your center of gravity shifts, your movements feel heavier, and stairs become a lot more dangerous than they look. She stood up, gathered her things, and made her way toward the stairs that led down from the balcony. The theater was mostly empty now. The stage lights were dimmed. The atmosphere had changed from busy and energetic to quiet and echoing. Now every sound felt bigger in the stillness. As she began walking down the stairs, she misjudged a step. It happened quickly. 1 second she was stepping forward, the next her foot didn't land where she expected it to. Her body pitched forward, momentum pulling her down. She later told me that in that instant, her mind didn't think about herself at all. Her first thought was me, the baby she was carrying. The fear hit hard and fast. The certainty that she was about to fall, and that the fall could hurt us both. Then something else happened. As she started to fall forward, she felt a hand grab her upper arm. Not lightly, not like a brush or a fleeting touch. It was firm, strong, and unmistakably intentional. The grip stopped her forward motion and pulled her backward instead. At the same time, she heard a voice. It was close to her ear, low and calm, and it whispered, "Hold on, I've got you." The hand didn't let go. It guided her back, steadying her, helping her regain balance. She reached for the handrail with her free hand, gripping it tightly. With the support of the unseen hand and the rail, she was able to make it down the rest of the stairs safely, step by careful step, until she reached the landing. Once she was stable, the grip on her arm was gone. She stood there for a moment, heart racing, breath shallow, trying to process what had just happened. She expected to see someone beside her, an usher, another actor, and anyone who might have been coming down the stairs at the same time. No one was there. She continued down into the lobby, still shaken, still replaying the sensation of that hand on her arm and the sound of the voice in her head. When she stepped out, the lobby was empty too. Quiet, still. The kind of quiet that feels heavier after something intense has just happened. A few minutes later, my biological father came up to meet her. She immediately asked him if he had seen anyone else up in the seats or on the stairs. Anyone at all. He told her no. He said the theater had been empty when he went up there. Everyone else had already left or was backstage packing up. There was no one who could have helped her. Later, she learned something else about the building. The theater company was located in a building that had once served as a hospital. It wasn't common knowledge among everyone, but it was part of the building's history. People who had worked there longer knew about it. It had treated patients long before it ever hosted plays and musicals. When my mother put all of that together, the thought crossed her mind that maybe what helped her wasn't a person at all. Maybe it was something else, someone else, a presence tied to that building, to its past. Perhaps a nurse, perhaps a doctor, someone whose instincts were so ingrained that even after death, they still reached out to prevent harm, especially to a pregnant woman and her unborn child. She never claimed to know for sure. She never turned it into a dramatic ghost story meant to scare people. She told it simply, honestly, as something that happened to her and stayed with her. If that hand hadn't grabbed her arm, if that voice hadn't told her to hold on, she might have fallen down a full flight of stairs while heavily pregnant. The outcome of that fall is something no one likes to think about. But she didn't fall, and I was born healthy. That's why this is her story, and mine too. Because sometimes the smallest moments, the ones that last only a few seconds, can change everything. And whether you believe in ghosts, spirits, or nothing at all, it's hard to ignore a moment where something unseen steps in at exactly the right time. Whatever it was, it saved us both. About 10 years ago, I lived in a house that was already a century old. 100 years of people coming and going, lives lived, arguments had, quiet nights, loud ones, births, deaths, and everything in between. At the time, I didn't think much about the age of the place. Old houses have character. They creak, they shift, they make noises you learn to live with. I wasn't someone who went around looking for ghosts, and I didn't move in expecting anything strange to happen. For a while, life there was completely normal. Most days, it was just me and my dog at home. She was a lab and German shepherd mix, smart, alert, and deeply attached to me. She was the kind of dog that followed you everywhere. If I got up from the couch, she got up too. If I went to another room, she was right behind me. She hated closed doors and didn't like being separated from her people for even a moment. Wherever I was, she wanted to be. One afternoon, I went down to the basement to do laundry. The basement was unfinished, like many in old houses. Concrete floors, exposed beams, low lighting, and a section that was clearly older than the rest, with darker stone walls and a colder feel to it. It wasn't a place I loved spending time in, but it wasn't terrifying either. Just old. As usual, my dog followed me down the stairs. She wandered off toward the older part of the basement while I bent down in front of the dryer, pulling clothes out and tossing them into a basket. Everything felt quiet and ordinary. The washing machine hummed softly, and the light overhead buzzed faintly. Then, without any warning at all, my dog bolted. She didn't just walk away or trot back toward the stairs. She ran full speed, nails scrambling against the concrete, body low, tail tucked. She flew past me and shot up the basement stairs like something was chasing her. The sound of her paws hitting the steps was frantic and loud, and then she was gone. I froze. I hadn't heard anything. No bang. No footsteps. No sudden noise that might have startled her. I stood there for a second, heart racing, listening hard, expecting something else to happen. The basement was silent except for the dryer. That's when the unease hit. I followed her upstairs quickly, not running, but definitely not taking my time. When I reached the top, she was standing in the kitchen, tense and alert, staring toward the basement door. Her ears were up, her body stiff, and her eyes were locked on the dark space below. She didn't look confused. She looked afraid. I called her name. She didn't move. I tried to laugh it off, telling myself she probably smelled something weird or startled herself. Dogs do strange things sometimes. But deep down, I knew this was different. I had lived with this dog for years. I knew her behavior. She had never reacted like that to anything before. After that day, something changed. No matter what we did, we could never get her to go back down into the basement. Not once. I could be carrying treats. I could be calling her in my happiest voice. I could be halfway down the stairs encouraging her. She would plant her feet at the top step and refuse to move. Sometimes she would whine softly. Other times she would just turn away. This was the same dog who normally couldn't stand to be away from me. The same dog who followed me into bathrooms, closets, and anywhere else I went. But the basement was different. It was a hard boundary for her. She wouldn't cross it. Years went by, and her behavior never changed. She never went back down there again. Every time I did laundry, she stayed upstairs, watching the basement door like she was waiting for something to come out. Over time, I stopped trying to force it. Whatever had scared her that day had made a deep impression, and I trusted her instincts more than my own. I've always believed that animals sense things we can't. They hear frequencies we don't notice, smell things we can't detect, and pick up on changes in the environment that slip past us. Maybe she heard something I didn't. Maybe she sensed something that wasn't meant for human perception. I don't know, but I do know that her fear was real. A couple of months after the basement incident, something else happened. It was evening, and my teenage son and I were sitting in the living room watching TV. The dog was with us, stretched out on the floor, relaxed. The house felt calm, safe. Just a normal night at home. Then we heard it. Heavy footsteps. They sounded like adult footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming up the wooden basement stairs. Not creaks, not settling noises, actual steps, the kind that come from boots or heavy shoes hitting old wood. Each step was distinct and evenly spaced, moving upward, exactly the way a person would climb stairs. I remember holding my breath. My son looked at me at the same time I looked at him. We both heard it. Even with the TV on, the sound cut through clearly. The dog lifted her head instantly, ears forward, listening. Her body tensed in a way that made my stomach drop. The footsteps continued up the stairs. I remember thinking the basement door was about to open. I waited for the handle to turn. I waited to see someone step into the room. My mind raced through possibilities. Had someone broken in? Was there some logical explanation I hadn't considered? Nothing happened. The footsteps stopped. The basement door stayed closed. The house went quiet again. We sat there for a few seconds, not saying anything, letting the silence stretch out. Finally, I muted the TV. The sudden quiet made everything feel louder somehow. I could hear my own breathing. "Did you hear that?" my son asked. I nodded. The dog didn't relax. She stayed alert, watching the basement door, as if she was waiting for the sound to start again. It never did. After a while, we turned the TV back on, but the mood was gone. That easy, comfortable feeling you have when you're just hanging out at home had vanished. Nothing else happened that night. No door opening, no footsteps continuing. No explanation revealed itself. But the memory of that sound stuck with us. The clarity of it. The way it didn't sound like a house noise at all, but like a person moving with purpose. After that, I started paying closer attention to the house. I noticed how certain areas always felt colder, especially near the basement stairs. I noticed how sound carried strangely sometimes, like it came from the wrong direction. I noticed how the dog would occasionally stare at the basement door for long periods, head tilted, listening to something I couldn't hear. Still, I didn't panic. I didn't start researching the house's history or calling in experts. I didn't feel threatened. It was more like living with an odd presence that kept its distance. Something that repeated itself, like a recording playing back moments from another time. That's why the idea of a residual haunting makes the most sense to me. Not a ghost that interacts or responds, not something aware of us, just leftover energy, an imprint. Like the house remembering its past and replaying it once in a while. Footsteps climbing stairs that were climbed 1,000 times before, movements echoing long after the people who made them were gone. That doesn't make it less creepy. If anything, it makes it more unsettling. The idea that places can hold on to moments, that actions can leave traces behind, that time isn't as clean and linear as we like to think, that maybe under the right conditions, the past can leak into the present. I don't know what my dog saw or sensed that day in the basement. I don't know who or what those footsteps belonged to. I only know that something happened that changed the way she behaved forever, and that both my son and I heard something we couldn't explain. I've lived in other places since then. Newer houses, apartments, quiet spaces with thin walls and modern layouts. I've never experienced anything like that again. My dogs since then have gone into basements without hesitation. No sudden fear, no refusal, but I still think about that old house sometimes, about the basement that my dog wouldn't enter, about the sound of boots on wooden stairs, about how the past might not always stay where we think it belongs. It wasn't dramatic. There were no apparitions, no voices calling names, no objects flying across rooms, just moments that didn't quite fit, moments that made you pause and wonder if maybe there's more to the world than what we see and hear. And honestly, that's what makes it linger in my mind. Because even now, years later, I can still hear those footsteps. Sorry to interrupt for just a moment. If you're new here, consider subscribing to Midnight Whispers for daily true horror stories that stay with you long after they're told, quietly unsettling and meant for the late hours. You can also turn on notifications so you're always here when a new story arrives and the night begins to stir again. Now, let's continue. This has happened to me more times than I can comfortably count. And for a long time, I didn't talk about it much because it sounds ridiculous if you haven't experienced it yourself. Every time it happens, it feels completely real in the moment. Not dream real, not half-awake confusion. Real in the way that makes your body react before your brain has a chance to question anything. Most of the time, it happens when I'm asleep or just waking up. I'll open my eyes and instantly feel like someone is in my room. Not a vague feeling, a certainty. I can see them. They're usually standing near my door or somewhere close to my bed, and they look wrong in that unmistakable way where your brain knows something isn't normal, but can't explain why. The figure is there, solid enough that my eyes register it, but shadowy at the same time. Sometimes it's human-shaped, sometimes just a presence that has a shape by default. When it first started happening, I would freeze. I'd sit up in bed, heart pounding, staring straight at whatever I thought I was seeing. I wouldn't scream or move. I'd just lock up completely, because I couldn't tell if it was real or not. There's a very specific kind of fear that comes from that uncertainty. If you know something isn't real, fear fades fast. If you know it is real, you react. But when you don't know, your body goes into this horrible middle state where everything stops. I'd stare, barely breathing, and blink slowly. Sometimes I'd blink over and over, forcing my eyes to focus, telling myself that if it was a dream, it would disappear. And sometimes it did. One blink it would be there, the next it wouldn't. The room would snap back into normality. shadows settling into familiar shapes, door frame looking like a door frame again instead of something watching me. Other times, I didn't freeze at all. Sometimes my body went straight into fight or flight before my mind caught up. If the figure wasn't blocking my way to the door, I'd run. No hesitation. I'd be out of bed and moving before I was fully conscious. My brain would only catch up once I was already in motion. More than once, I've woken up properly while standing in my living room, heart racing, confused about how I got there. I live in a small condo, so it doesn't take long to cross from bedroom to living room, but that short distance feels like a blur when it happens. One moment I'm asleep, the next I'm standing under the living room light, breathing hard, trying to piece together what just happened. If the figure was between me and the door, my instinct went the other way. Instead of running, I'd leap at it. There was no conscious decision involved, no thought process, just this overwhelming certainty that something dangerous was blocking my escape, and the only option was to get through it. It didn't matter what it was. My body reacted the same way every time, like a switch had been flipped. Looking back on it while fully awake, the idea of attacking something I couldn't even confirm was real is terrifying in its own way. But in the moment, it feels logical, necessary. One incident in particular stands out because it was the first time someone else witnessed the aftermath. I was sleeping next to my ex at the time. We were both in bed, covers pulled up, the room dark and quiet. I don't know what triggered it that night, but I woke up suddenly and saw two figures standing at the foot of the bed. Not one, two. They weren't touching us, but they were close enough that my body reacted instantly. My first thought wasn't about myself. It was about her. I remember this very clearly. I thought that if something was wrong, I couldn't just run and leave her there. The door was blocked anyway, so my brain skipped straight to the same instinct it always did in that situation. I jumped. What I didn't account for was the fact that I was almost completely wrapped in blankets. When I launched myself forward, the blankets came with me. They ripped off the bed in one violent motion, tangled around my arms and legs, and turned what should have been a clean leap into a chaotic mess. Our bedroom wasn't very big. The distance from the foot of the bed to the wall was shorter than my body probably assumed in that half-dream state. I didn't hit anything that resembled a shadowy figure. I hit the wall, hard. I remember my head planting into it, the shock snapping me into full awareness instantly. I slid down to the floor, tangled in blankets, heart hammering, trying to understand why I was suddenly in pain. Behind me, my ex woke up to the sound of the impact and sat bolt upright, staring at me like I'd completely lost my mind. From her perspective, I had gone from being asleep to launching myself out of bed, tearing all the covers off and slamming into the wall for no apparent reason. She just stared at me and said something along the lines of, "What the hell are you doing?" I didn't even know how to answer that. I was still catching my breath, still half shaken by what I thought I'd seen, trying to reconcile the image of two figures at the foot of the bed with the very solid wall my head had just met. I mumbled something about a dream, about thinking something was there. She was confused, irritated, but more concerned than angry. That wasn't the last time something like that happened while we were together. Eventually, she got used to it. That alone should tell you how often these episodes happen. When something strange becomes routine, it loses its shock value. By the time I jumped out of a window while sleepwalking, she barely reacted the way a normal person probably should have. She was alarmed, sure, but not surprised. It had become part of living with me. The thing is, these episodes don't always follow the same script. Most of the time, it's a figure, a presence that feels human, or at least humanoid, something watching, something waiting. But recently, something changed. Just last week, I had an experience that was similar in structure, but completely different in form. Instead of waking up and seeing a figure in my room, I woke up convinced there was a small animal in bed with me. A kitten. A little stray kitten that had somehow gotten under the covers. I don't own any pets. I haven't for a while. There was no logical reason for this belief, but logic wasn't part of the equation at that moment. I could feel it, or at least I thought I could. A small, warm shape shifting near my legs. My immediate reaction wasn't fear. It was concern. I was terrified that I had rolled over onto it in my sleep or scared it. My heart started racing, but not in panic, in urgency. I started frantically trying to find it under the blankets, moving slowly and carefully, talking out loud without even realizing I was doing it. I remember whispering, telling it that it was okay, that it was safe, that I wasn't going to hurt it. I was desperate to reassure something that didn't exist. I pulled the covers back, expecting at any second to see a pair of frightened eyes or feel a tiny body scramble away. There was nothing. The bed was empty. The room was empty. The silence that followed felt heavy and disorienting. While I sat there for a long time, blankets bunched in my hands, trying to process how real it had felt. This wasn't the usual fear-based hallucination. This was emotional, protective, gentle even. That's what unsettled me the most. In all the other episodes, my reaction had been driven by perceived danger. This time, it was driven by empathy, by the instinct to protect something vulnerable. It made me realize just how convincing these experiences can be. My brain didn't just invent a threat. It invented a responsibility. I've read enough over the years to know that what I experience likely falls under sleep-related hallucinations or parasomnia. The brain waking up before the body, or vice versa. Dream imagery bleeding into reality. The mind filling in gaps before logic has time to intervene. I understand that explanation, and it makes sense on paper. But understanding it doesn't make it easier when it happens. In the moment, your body doesn't care about scientific explanations. It reacts to what it thinks is real. Your heart rate spikes, your muscles tense, your instincts take over. And by the time you're fully awake, the damage is already done. You've run into walls, ripped blankets off beds, terrified partners, or stood shaking in another room wondering how you got there. What makes it worse is how vivid the memories are afterward. These aren't hazy dream fragments that fade with daylight. They stick with you. You remember where the figure stood, how close it was, the feeling of being watched. Or, in the case of the kitten, the warmth and the panic and the sudden emptiness when you realize nothing was there. I don't think these experiences mean anything supernatural. I don't think there's something actually standing in my room at night. But I also can't deny how deeply they affect me, how real they feel, how they blur the line between sleeping and waking in a way that makes you question your own perception. Each time it happens, there's a brief period afterward where I'm shaken, even embarrassed. I replay it in my head, analyzing it from every angle, trying to figure out what triggered it this time. Stress, lack of sleep, anxiety, changes in routine. Sometimes I can trace it back to something obvious. Other times, there's no clear cause at all. The kitten incident especially caught me off guard because it broke the pattern I'd come to expect. It showed me that my brain isn't limited to one type of illusion. It can create whatever makes the most emotional sense in the moment. whether that's a threat or something that needs protecting. And that's the part that still gets to me. Because if my mind can do that so convincingly while I'm asleep, it's a reminder of how fragile our sense of reality really is. How easily the brain can fill in blanks and present them as truth. How quickly instinct can override reason. When people talk about seeing things at night, about figures in their rooms or presences they can't explain, I understand them on a level that's hard to put into words. Not because I believe it's something supernatural, but because I know how real it feels when your brain decides it is. Even now, when I wake up suddenly in the dark, there's always a split second where I scan the room, checking corners, doorways, shadows, making sure everything is where it should be, making sure nothing is watching. Most nights, nothing happens. But every once in a while, my brain reminds me just how convincing it can be when it decides otherwise. This is one of those moments that has stayed with me for years. Not because it turned me into a believer or changed how I see the world, but because I still can't fully explain it. I've replayed it in my head countless times, tried to break it down logically, tried to find a normal explanation that fits every detail, and I always end up in the same place. I don't know what I saw. I don't know how it happened. And even though I still don't believe in ghosts, that night left a mark on me in a way very few experiences ever have. My wife and I were staying at her great-grandmother's house. The house had been in her family for generations, and her great-grandmother had passed away years before. It wasn't abandoned or falling apart. It was still very much lived in and cared for, but it carried that unmistakable feeling old houses have. The kind of place that feels heavy with history, where you're constantly aware that a lot of life happened within those walls long before you ever stepped inside. The house sat near a lake, and one of its most striking features was the living room. The entire wall facing the water was made up of large bay windows. During the day, they filled the room with light and gave an incredible view of the lake. At night, though, they turned into a dark mirror, reflecting the inside of the room back at you. If you stood there after sunset, you could see yourself clearly, along with anyone else behind you, layered over the black surface of the lake outside. That night, everything was quiet. The house had settled into that deep nighttime silence where every small sound feels louder than it should. No TV was on. No music. Just the faint, distant noises that old houses make when they cool down. Wood shifting, pipes clicking softly somewhere far away. I was standing in the living room, facing the windows, looking out at the lake. Outside it was pitch black. The water reflected almost no light, and the trees on the far side were just dark shapes against a darker sky. It was peaceful in a way that made you feel small, like the world outside was vast and indifferent. As I stood there, I could see the reflection of the room behind me in the glass, the furniture, the dim lighting, and very clearly my wife standing a few feet back. She was right behind me, close enough that I could see her shape without straining, her outline familiar and unmistakable. I said something to her. Nothing important, just one of those random, everyday comments couples make without thinking. Something casual, something forgettable. I don't even remember what I said, just that I expected a response. She didn't answer. At first, that didn't register as strange. Maybe she hadn't heard me. Maybe she was distracted. I stayed facing the window and said something again, slightly louder this time, still casual. I remember glancing more directly at her reflection as I spoke, waiting to see her react. She didn't move. She didn't respond. She just stood there in the reflection. That's when a faint sense of unease started to creep in. Not fear, not yet. Just that subtle feeling you get when something is slightly off. I focused more intently on the reflection and said her name, expecting her to look up or answer. Nothing. I remember thinking it was odd that she wasn't responding at all. Even if she was annoyed or distracted, she would have reacted somehow. Shifted her weight, looked at me, said something short. Anything. So I turned around. The space behind me was empty. There was no one there. For a split second, my brain tried to reject what my eyes were telling it. I stood there, turning my head slightly, scanning the room, half expecting her to be just out of view. But she wasn't. The living room was empty, completely empty. A chill ran through me so fast and so strong that it felt physical. The hairs on the back of my neck stood straight up. It was like my body reacted before my mind had time to catch up. My heart started pounding, and I could feel that cold, hollow sensation in my chest that comes with sudden fear. I called out to her. She answered from upstairs. Her voice came from the bedroom, clear and normal, completely unbothered. She hadn't been in the living room at all. I stood there, frozen for a moment, my mind racing. My thoughts were scrambling for explanations. Maybe it was a reflection of something else. A coat, a shadow, a trick of the light. But the problem was that what I had seen wasn't vague. It wasn't a shape that could easily be mistaken for something else. It was her. Her height, her outline, the way she stood. Familiar enough that I hadn't questioned it for even a second. I didn't have the courage to turn back toward the window. The idea of looking at that reflection again, of seeing whether something was still there, made my stomach twist. I didn't want to confirm anything. I didn't want to risk seeing it again, whatever it was. Instinct took over, and I moved fast. I practically ran up the stairs. When I reached the bedroom, my wife looked at me like I'd lost my mind. I must have been pale, because the first thing she asked was if I was okay. I blurted it out without thinking, my words tumbling over each other. I think I just saw a ghost. She barely reacted. She didn't laugh. She didn't look shocked. She didn't even seem surprised. She just nodded slightly and said, in the most casual tone imaginable, "Yeah, probably. My great-grandmother totally haunts this place." That response messed with me almost as much as the experience itself. She said it like she was talking about bad plumbing or a squeaky floorboard, like it was just a known fact, something everyone accepted without question. She went on to explain that people in her family had joked about it for years. Strange things, weird feelings, little moments that didn't quite add up. Nothing dramatic enough to scare anyone away, but enough that the idea of her great-grandmother's presence had become part of the family's shared lore. I didn't sleep well that night. Every time I closed my eyes, the image replayed in my head, standing at the window, seeing her reflection, talking to it, the silence in response, turning around and finding empty space, the way my body reacted before I could even process what was happening. What disturbed me the most wasn't the idea of a ghost. It was how real it had felt. There was no dreamlike quality to it. No fuzziness. I was fully awake, fully alert. I remember exactly where I was standing, what the room looked like, the temperature of the air, the sound of my own voice. I tried to analyze it logically. Reflection tricks can be powerful, especially in low light. Our brains are excellent at filling in gaps, especially when we expect to see something familiar. I told myself that maybe I caught a glimpse of movement somewhere else in the room, and my brain stitched it together into an image of my wife. Maybe the glass reflected something from another angle I didn't consider. Maybe exhaustion played a role. But every explanation felt incomplete. The reflection didn't move strangely. It didn't distort or flicker. It stood there exactly the way a person would. Exactly the way my wife stands when she's behind me, waiting for me to finish whatever I'm doing. That's why I didn't question it. That's why I spoke to it without hesitation. What makes it worse is that if I had turned around immediately after seeing the reflection, I might have brushed it off more easily. I could have told myself I misinterpreted a shape, but I interacted with it. I spoke to it twice. I waited for a response. I focused on it, and it stayed there until I turned around. I still don't believe in ghosts. That hasn't changed. I don't think there was some conscious spirit standing behind me, mimicking my wife. I don't think her great-grandmother was watching me through the glass, believing that would require a complete shift in how I understand the world. And I'm not there. But I also can't honestly say that I know what happened. That's the part that sticks with me, the uncertainty, the lack of a satisfying explanation, the way my body reacted so strongly to something my mind couldn't categorize. I've had other moments in my life that were unsettling, sudden noises, shadows, that feeling of being watched that fades as soon as you rationalize it. But this was different. This wasn't a fleeting sensation. It was a clear, structured experience with a beginning, middle, and end. Seeing something, engaging with it, realizing it wasn't real, or at least not real in the way it should have been. Sometimes I think about how easily the brain can be fooled, how perception isn't as reliable as we like to believe, how much we trust our senses without question until they give us a reason not to. That night forced me to confront the idea that certainty is fragile, that even when you're sure of what you're seeing, you might be wrong. And sometimes I think about the house itself, about all the people who lived there before us, about her great-grandmother, whose life had filled those rooms for decades, about how memory and emotion can cling to places, shaping how we experience them. Maybe it wasn't a ghost. Maybe it was my own mind, influenced by the weight of the place, the quiet, the darkness, and the familiarity of the reflection. But then I remember how cold my blood felt in that moment, how instinctive the fear was, how deeply my body believed something was wrong. That's not something logic easily erases. Even now, years later, and I sometimes think back to that night when I'm standing near a window after dark, when I catch my reflection and the reflections of others behind me. There's always a brief moment where my chest tightens and I feel that old unease just for a second. I don't turn around right away. I give myself a beat, just to be sure. I worked at a radio station in New Mexico that had a reputation long before I ever set foot in it. People around town talked about the place the same way they talk about bad stretches of highway or abandoned buildings. Not with excitement, but with a kind of uneasy familiarity. It had been listed more than once as one of the most haunted places in the state, and even though I didn't really believe in that kind of thing, I couldn't help but be curious. At the time, I needed a job, and the shift they offered me fit my schedule perfectly. Whatever stories existed about the building felt distant and exaggerated, like most local legends tend to be. The station was housed in what used to be a large old home. It didn't look like a typical commercial building at all. From the outside, it still looked residential, with a porch, pitched roof, and windows that had probably once belonged to bedrooms and living spaces instead of offices and studios. Inside, it had been converted in the most practical way possible. Walls had been added or removed where needed, rooms had been repurposed, and wires snaked along places where you could tell they hadn't originally belonged. No matter how much equipment you packed into it, though, the building never quite lost the feeling that it had once been someone's home. The story everyone told went back to the last man who had lived there. According to local lore, he had made his living carving gravestones, and he did most of that work in the basement. This wasn't a hobby. It was his job. Day after day, he worked underground, carving names, dates, and epitaphs into stone. Supposedly, he died while working on one of those gravestones. Some versions of the story said it was a heart attack. Others said an accident. No one ever agreed on the details, only on the outcome. When the building changed hands and became the radio station, the new owners discovered that one of the stones was still down there. Instead of removing it immediately, they left it where it was. Whether out of convenience, oversight, or superstition, I don't know. But according to everyone who worked there before me, that decision had consequences. People who had been around in the earlier years told me stories. Not dramatic ones filled with screaming or running, but quieter, more unsettling things. Shadowy figures glimpsed in rooms no one was using. Lights turning themselves on or off when no one was near the switches. Doors found open after being locked. Equipment malfunctioning in ways that didn't quite make sense. Over time, the activities supposedly got worse until someone finally decided the stone had to go. When it was removed from the basement, most of the strange things stopped. Most, but not all. By the time I started working there, the gravestone itself was gone, but the outline where it had sat was still visible on the basement floor. You could see the shape clearly, like a scar left behind. The concrete in that spot looked different, darker somehow, as if the stone had pressed itself into the place over time. Even people who didn't believe in anything supernatural admitted that the basement felt off. Cold, quiet, and heavy in a way that didn't match the rest of the building. I worked the night shift, which meant I was often alone for hours at a time. During the day, the station was busy. DJs came and went. Salespeople moved through the offices. Phones rang, music played, and everything felt normal. At night, all of that vanished. The building settled into silence, broken only by the hum of equipment and the sound of my own voice through the headphones. The basement door was located in the break room. It wasn't hidden or locked away in some dark hallway. It was right there, along the wall, plain and unremarkable. The vending machine was positioned on the other side of the room, which meant that every time you wanted a snack or a drink, you had to walk past that door. Most of the time, it didn't bother me at all. I'd walk by without even thinking about it. But sometimes, without any warning, something would change. I would be halfway across the room when a sudden wave of fear hit me. Not nervousness, not imagination. Fear. The kind that makes your skin prickle and your stomach drop. The hair on my arms and the back of my neck would stand straight up, and my chest would tighten, like my body was preparing for something bad to happen. There was no sound, no movement, nothing I could point to and say, that's the reason. Just a powerful urge to get away from that door as fast as possible. Every instinct screamed at me to run. I never actually did. I would force myself to keep walking, grab whatever I came for, and get back to the studio as quickly and calmly as I could manage. But my heart would be racing by the time I closed the studio door behind me. I'd sit there for a while afterward, headphones on, staring at the equipment, trying to convince myself that it was just my imagination, that I had psyched myself out by listening to too many stories. The problem was that the feeling didn't happen every time. If it had, I could have blamed anxiety or suggestion, but it was unpredictable. Most trips past that door were uneventful. And then, out of nowhere, One would feel like walking past the edge of something dangerous. One night, something happened that was harder to explain away. Part of my job was to make sure the lights were off in the parts of the building that weren't being used. It was late, and I was the only one there. I walked through the offices, flipping switches, moving from room to room until everything was dark. Once I was done, I went back into the studio, shut the door, and kept doing my show. After a while, I realized I needed something from one of the offices. I stepped out of the studio and stopped short. Every light was on, all of them. Offices, hallways, rooms I had personally just turned dark not long before. The building looked exactly the way it did during the day, except there was no one there. No voices, no footsteps, no explanation. I stood there for a moment, frozen, listening. The silence felt louder than usual. I checked the rooms one by one. Empty, every single one. I told myself I must have forgotten to turn the lights off in the first place, even though I knew that wasn't true. I turned them off again and went back into the studio, trying not to think about it. Then there were the CD players. Back then, we still used CDs regularly. Physical discs loaded into players that had trays which slid in and out. On more than one occasion, I watched those trays open and close on their own. Not slowly, not hesitantly, but smoothly, the way they did when you pressed the button. The first time it happened, I laughed nervously and told myself it was a mechanical issue. Old equipment does weird things. The second time, it wasn't funny anymore. The third time, I stopped making jokes about it entirely. But the story that stuck with me the most didn't happen to me at all. It was told to me by the guy who worked the overnight shift before I did. He wasn't the kind of person who exaggerated or tried to scare people. He was calm, practical, and matter-of-fact. When he told the story, he didn't embellish it. He didn't dramatize it. That somehow made it worse. He said he was doing his show late one night, playing music as usual. One of the songs he played was a new track from a Bon Jovi album. The song was playing normally, nothing strange about it. Then the lights flickered. Not a full blackout. Just a brief flicker. The kind you might notice and then forget about. He glanced down at the CD player out of habit, eye checking the display. It was showing a different track number than the one that was playing. The music didn't skip. It didn't change. The song continued exactly as it should have. But the display insisted that another track was playing. Confused, he let the song finish and ejected the CD. He checked the track list on the album, matching the number shown on the display to the actual song title. The track listed was called "I'll Sleep When I'm Dead." He didn't laugh when he told me that. He didn't say it proved anything. He just said it bothered him enough that he never forgot it. He finished his shift that night, locked up, and went home. He didn't quit immediately, but he never felt completely comfortable in the building again. Working there changed how I thought about certain things. I didn't leave believing in ghosts, exactly. I still don't walk around convinced that spirits are everywhere, or that every strange experience has a supernatural explanation. But I also stopped dismissing everything so easily. That building had layers, history, use piled on top of use. A home turned into a workplace, a basement once used to carve reminders of death, now housing radio equipment and storage. People like to think places are just places, that they don't hold on to anything. But spending night after night alone in that station made me question that idea. There was never a single moment where something undeniable happened. No figure appeared in front of me. No voice spoke my name. No hand touched my shoulder. It was always small things, feelings, movements, changes that made no sense but didn't last long enough to confront directly. And maybe that's why it stuck with me. Because it wasn't dramatic enough to become a clear ghost story, but it was unsettling enough that I couldn't ignore it either. The building felt aware in some subtle way, like it remembered what it had been before, and wasn't entirely comfortable with what it had become. When I eventually left that job, I felt a strange sense of relief. Not because I thought I was escaping something dangerous, but because I no longer had to sit alone in that space at night, listening to the quiet and wondering what parts of it didn't belong to me. I still think about that place sometimes, about the basement door, the outline on the floor, the lights turning themselves back on, the CD player insisting on a song title that felt more like a message than a coincidence. I don't know what any of it meant, but I know that working there taught me something I didn't expect. That even if you don't believe in ghosts, there are places that make you feel like you're not entirely alone. And sometimes that feeling is more powerful than any explanation you could come up with. If you're still here, then these stories didn't simply fade away. They settled in. Every story you heard tonight came from real moments, real people, and real situations where something felt off or nearly went wrong. If you want to keep exploring stories that linger in your thoughts long after the night grows quiet, consider subscribing to Midnight Whispers. There are more stories waiting in the dark, and not all of them let you leave in time.